Welcome to Swami Reacts, and today I'll be reflecting on Season 5 of The Chosen. For those who are not aware, The Chosen is a well-known series, Christian series depicting the life of Jesus and especially focused on his followers, the apostles. So recently I've been able to go through Season 5. Some years ago I had the chance of going through the first 4 seasons, which I really liked and appreciate. So today I like to reflect on what keeps bringing me back to this particular storytelling in the form of cinematography and how the ancient teachings and life example of Jesus is depicted in most contemporary modern technological terms, which for me is a very important part. And that's why in this Swami React series, not only I do review books, but many times series or movies, because I personally think that this type of expression connects us emotionally on a very interesting level to, in this case, to a very, of course, sacred figure like Jesus, that many times we may not hear and catch all the nuance and implications of his life by just reading through. So sometimes I'm totally open for a movie or a series or a depiction or a theatrical dramatic performance to further convey the implications and the nuance and the in-betweens of what we find in the sacred text. So Season 5 of The Chosen is very interesting, and of course will try not to spoil the whole thing as too much, but it's taking us into very mysterious, darker waters than in comparison to the previous seasons. Now here we find Jesus beginning to suffer, really. Now, not just physically, but relationally, spiritually, socially, personally as a monk, as an aspirant to serve others through a spiritual mentorship. Of course, I'm not approaching here through all these words through technically Christian doctrinal lenses, but as a seeker, as someone who tries to acknowledge in my own life and the life of others of how actual spiritual progress and growth many times unfolds under pressure, under complexity, under pain, under betrayal, under all these elements that in one sense this season 5 starts to present more and more, and they will continue to unfold into seasons 6 and 7. I heard there are 2 more seasons remaining. So but before that, since I never recorded anything about all the other seasons, in general, something that I appreciated about The Chosen is how many times they use modern phrasing or modern expressions. We will say modern, something that Jesus wouldn't have talked or moved his face in certain ways thousands of years ago, but they will use these familiar tones or modern phrases in its dialogue to, of course, create familiarity, to make it relevant and relatable for those of us who are watching this 2,000 years after, basically. And of course, some critics have pointed to that in this particular direction. Oh, that's breaking what we may call historical realism. That was not how it actually happened, he did it. And yeah, from a literalistic point of view, that may have been the case. But personally, I see it differently. I feel, okay, that may not have been what Jesus said, how he moved his face and smiled, but that creates emotional relatability by referring to certain ways of expression, which of course they are not too postmodern to the point that you feel, oh, this has nothing to do with what happened. So still I acknowledge the tension, of course, because there is this interesting point that the stronger a portrayal is of a religious figure, of whomever, whatever, the more it risks becoming the only way we can imagine that story. You follow my point? Oh. This Jesus from The Chosen for many may become the only Jesus in the minds of many, which is, of course, in one sense, it could be a gift. It can create some relatability, but also it can be a limitation because we are talking about infinity here. Recently, I haven't watched that movie, but I heard that there was a movie related to our tradition, Narasimhadev movie. And I've heard basically these 2 things. Some people appreciating it, expressing their inspiration, and some others feeling it was too technological, everyone was too muscular, and somehow I didn't feel the connection I felt with going to the original narrative. So this tension is there. The Chosen is not an exception to that rule. But anyhow, that's something that I especially appreciate in how to make an ancient narrative, something that happened thousands of years ago, how to enter into the storytelling of it, presenting it in a way that is relevant and relatable without compromising its essential message, but adjusting the details that will help to access that essence. So going back to season 5, I will say that Jesus feels more alone than ever before, going back to the suffering and the complexity that comes in this particular season. He knows the cross is coming. He's talking about that to his associates. The miracles slow down, or another form of miracles, if you will, is building up. The crowds start to split, confusion reigns. The disciples, in one way, start to fracture in different ways. And Jesus is not raging against it, the interesting thing. He's walking into that voluntarily with all the difficulty that entails. Very steadily, very quietly, very fearlessly, and courageously, which of course is an invitation for all of us to walk into life knowing that there will be difficulty, knowing that there will be suffering, pain, death. Now I'm thinking, for example, even about Krishna's mood before the battle of Kurukshetra began, and he knew some things will happen here. Carrying on his heart the weight of everyone's karma, if you will, he's still holding the chariot steady. So that's a very powerful symbol for us to deal with our daily life. So in this season 5, Jesus, again, we will find Jesus who is in one way tired, in a sacred way, tired, grieving, who is second-guessed by others, who is misunderstood, who is misrepresented. And on top of that, still he keeps loving. He keeps praying, he keeps opening his heart, he keeps being empathic, he keeps dedicating, sacrificing quietly, firmly, without show, without performance, without external miracles. Again, we are not talking here about the superhero savior. We should gradually dispense from that idea that even most of us bring with in our spiritual journey, projecting to Jesus, into Guru, into whomever. We're looking for the superhero savior, super extraordinary, miraculous performance. And eventually we need to grow and realize the actual miracle, the actual real thing happens in a different way. So spiritual prophets deal with this totally. We know with the weight of the price that it takes to walk life from a sacred place, embracing love, integrating paradox. It's not comfortable. There's a price to pay. And this affects Jesus' disciples as well, for sure. Again, the series is constantly, the chosen could be taken to mean, Christ is the chosen Jesus, but actually the chosen, if I'm not mistaken, also is a play of words to mostly also refer to those 12 chosen apostles that will represent Jesus. So there's a lot of time in relation to them invested in the series. So the disciples goes, as Jesus is going through a very particular period of suffering and grieving, of course, the disciples are going through their own dark night of the soul, if you will. So that's another important point in terms of discipleship that becomes harder as the mission gets more obscure, let's say in this way, more mysterious, more complex. Some of the disciples want more action, more rebelliousness against the social status quo. Some others are afraid of the repercussions of what may happen. Most of them are confused about Jesus' words about the cross and what will happen in the near future, and trying to think, is that a parable? Is he speaking literally? Why he's speaking so many times about the same thing? And of course, one of the main figures that emerge in this particular series is Judas. Like we know, he is the one who ends up betraying Jesus, though, of course, in alternative versions, like if you go to the known as apocryphal Gospel of Judas, actually Judas is depicted as the highest disciple who knew Jesus so much, and he was willing to sacrifice himself and be hated for eternity in order to facilitate the glory of Jesus. But again, that's an alternative reading that Srila Siddhar Maharaj in our tradition will present that I really appreciate. That's not the main emphasis in this particular series, which is fine. So Judas is presented as the traitor, basically the one who is betraying Jesus. But actually, interestingly, of course, as we know, it's not that Judas hated Jesus. He had affection for him. But he has some doubts, and he had some idealized idea of what Jesus should be and what the actual Messiah should look like and what he will end up doing, like conquering everyone and reestablishing the kingdom, successing David, and so on. So he had doubts. Doubts doesn't make you a traitor, we will say. But probably unacknowledged fear that Judas had can rot even sincere loyalty. So sometimes we may have fears about someone, what will happen, is this the person or not? And if we are not fully embracing that with integrity, that may end up in ways that gets in the way of our faith and loyalty. So of course, the particular climate in which this season 5 unfolds is Rome is tightened, control. There's lots of political tension in the environment. Religious leaders, Jewish Pharisees and others, our authorities, are plotting how to kill Jesus. The crowds shift from awe to suspicion, some of them. So there is lots of interesting dynamics, tension, confusion. And again, through all of that, Jesus becomes more inward, even more, praying more, less trying to convince, preaching less miracles, less trying again to convince, more trying to prepare for the next chapter or next stage, which will be, of course, his condemnation and crucifixion, which I'm sure will come in the next season. So in one sense, this season, to wrap up, is less about external miracles and more about internal miracle, if you will. We will say internal breaking down, breaking open, and of course, eventually breaking through. So English allows us for that beautiful use of the language. So that depicts the journey for all of us in many ways. We sometimes need to be broken down, broken open to eventually break through. I'm entering to a new level of reality, as Father Richard will say, right? Order, disorder, reorder. So this season is all about that. What happens when your faith is tested by complexity, by difficulty, by crisis, by betrayal, by silence? What happens when the people that you thought were your role reference roles, model, point of view, point of reference, seem acting in strange ways? What to do with that? What happens when you feel that love is delaying its answer? Are we trusting? Are we waiting? What's the role of patience there? So in summary, I say this season 5 was a very wonderful, powerful exploration of that middle space, which is many times the middle space where many of us give up, lose faith, fall back, grow cynical, resentful. That's not the idea, of course. So that's a question that this season leaves us with. Like, can we, despite all of that, despite it all, can we stay near love, even if we sometimes need to take distance from situations, people, whatever? Can we stay near love, near faith, near trust, even when we are confused, even when we are bewildered in a liminal space, even we have to embrace a deeper, darker mystery, which may end up being more enlightening at the end? So those are some of the main themes I would like to share with you. Of course, I'm personally from a sister tradition, as I like to call Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but nonetheless, of course, I find this deeply resonant, the teachings and life of Jesus, fully divine, fully human. In our tradition, we follow a God who is fully divine, fully human. We have the figure of Sri Chaitanya Dev. And in many ways, and in the figures of many of our great teachers in their life too, we find betrayal, we find loss, we find silence, war, division, compassion, fracturing, exile. So many of these classical elements that we may say are necessary for the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell will have mentioned it. So spiritual leadership has a price to pay, and many times it's rarely triumphant. Externally, on the outside may feel or be seen like defeat, actually. But the real paradoxical triumph goes beyond the external, beyond the formal. There's a price to love, and the price is high. The more real, the more deep, the more divine the love, the more the price we're invited to pay. Not as something bad, not as something we should be terrified or scared of, but just as a joyful invitation. And actually, whatever price we pay is nothing ever in comparison to the gift we are already receiving. So if you have watched season 5, I love to hear what it stirred in you. Also, you can share in the comments now what scene hit you the deepest, or which character's doubt somehow felt most like yours, because all these things are mirroring back, right? Ideally are reflecting part of our own journey. Where did you see yourself in this particular series, in this particular chapter, season? Not necessarily in the glory, but in confusion. So thanks for your time. Until next time, in Swami Reacts, keep walking the path, even when it gets dark. See you soon. Thanks for coming.